Risa Renee, I think we're going to be ready. Our first item of action that we're going to address today is the approval of core content licensure tests and cut scores. Risa Renee, if you would. We're under new business, approval of core content licensure tests and cut scores.
Okay. Over the past year and a half, the board has approved a number of new teacher licensure tests and cut scores. And we have 3 additional tests that have been under development. A PE test, a health test, and a test for an area called virtual instruction, which is a brand new content area for us. And the score setting panels met on these just a few weeks ago. And we need preliminary approval of the test blueprints and preliminary cut scores so that we can post these for public comment for 30 days. And after we have had 30 days of public comment, we will be bringing whatever comments we receive back to you so you can consider those before final approval of these 3 tests and final cut scores. You had in your materials the test blueprint for all 3 of these content tests and a summary of the panel-based cut scores and the cut scores at -1, -2, +1, +2 standard errors of measurement. We also have a full score setting study that is very lengthy, but we'd be happy to make that available to you too if you'd like to see it. But today we need preliminary approval of the 3 tests and cut scores, and we are recommending the panel-based score level so that we can post these for public comment.
A quick question, have we accepted the panel-based scores on all the other assessments?
Yes, all of the other assessments have been set at the panel-based score level.
Okay. Is there a motion to preliminarily approve the content tests for physical education, health, and virtual instruction and their respective panel-based passing scores?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
I have a question.
Yes.
The virtual instruction certificate, there's a international organization that deals with virtual instructors, and they have a set of national standards. My question is, how are the recommended standards aligned with those national standards?
Let's see. We have Nancy Hahn from Pearson that developed the standards and worked on the test development, and I'm sure she can answer that for you.
Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you. Superintendent Ritz, Dr. Freitas. The question was about the standards that we used. We actually worked with Candace Dodson in the e-learning group at the department when we drafted our standards. We also worked with, I don't have the alignment tables in front of me, and I'm not recalling that it was an international organization that we worked with. I am recalling that it was a national organization that deals with e-learning.
My question deals with, there is a set of national standards. I was just reviewing them last night, and I just want to be sure there is some kind of an alignment. How do these standards align with the national ones? How do they contrast?
I would have to talk to a test developer about that. My understanding, though, is that they worked closely with Candace Dodson in developing the standards for this assessment.
There was, my second question before I go to my colleague, if that's okay.
Yeah.
That I received some communication last night very late that raised some question about these particular standards, and I'm unsure whether or not there are some of our constituents within Indiana that have some concerns about the standards, and I'd like to see more time on that particular one out of the 3 to gain more input from some of our Indiana people. If we were to table just that virtual instruction one today, what kind of implications does it have on a timeline? Can we take the virtual instruction one up next month without having severe negative consequences?
Risa, do you want to talk about the procedure by which we have the standards?
I think the short answer to your question is yes, you could table that one for a month without any kind of raising significant concerns. The timeline on tests and scores is that once we've posted them for public comment for 30 days and brought those back to you for final approval, the rule says that those tests and scores cannot be applied to candidates until at least the passage of 6 months. So we would not be applying these new tests and these cut scores to licensure candidates for 6 months. The virtual instruction is a brand new content area that actually is included in the REPA 3 proposed rule that you all have been working on and will be seeing a final version of probably at next month's meeting. So, you know, because that's a new area, we were going to recommend when you finally approve the virtual instruction test that you make it kind of optional for a little while as we phase in and get candidates into the pipeline, into virtual instruction programs. So it will not be a significant problem if you want to delay that for a month.
So thanks for that response. That's really helpful. In that, I believe in getting public information, and since this individual had real issues with that particular certificate, I believe it was a school leader, and I would recommend we divide the question to pull out the virtual instruction from this particular motion. Then I'll make a motion to table after this motion either is passed or not.
So I have a question. So I'm not sure what you're expecting to happen between now and tabling it for the next, are you wanting it for the next meeting?
Are you asking for a crosswalk to national standards, or?
I'm asking to table it till next month because it doesn't seem like it has any severe consequences, number one. Number two, it provides opportunities for this individual, who's a school leader as well as other people, to give more input by next month. So I'm hoping to bring it back on the agenda as an action item to approve it.
Okay, so let's go back and talk about how they're developed.
That's in addition to public comment, right? That would be in addition to a 30-day public comment period?
I'm recommending that we table it till next month.
Okay, so but I got to know what we're going to do with it. So so can you explain to it? So these standards were developed, and they were put out for public comment, correct? Or what's the process by which the standards were developed? That's what I want to know.
The standards were developed using practitioners and higher educators and individuals who are involved in virtual instruction in the state already, as well as the director of our e-learning division in the department and other folks that we have that are deeply involved with e-learning with the school districts and the national organization. And those standards were developed with a lot of input from practitioners. Those standards were developed probably a year ago.
That's what I said, yeah. They were developed before me.
Those standards were developed in 2012.
Yeah.
Is when we started working on those standards for virtual instruction.
And there was a process.
In terms of history, this wasn't initially part of the licensure program. After we were awarded the contract, the department had come to us, and I think it was in conjunction with some legislation that at the time was moving through the state to make it a requirement that every teacher or every student have to take an online course. My understanding of that process is that that never became law.
No.
In the meantime, we were asked to continue to develop the test. Then we were asked to put it on hold for a little bit. Now it's in REPA 3, so we brought it back. So it's really your discretion.
So, I mean, my plan is to still divide the question and vote on the PE and health, and then I'll have a separate motion on virtual instruction, and my colleagues can decide how to deal with this. So to divide the question would mean that this motion would pertain to health and PE only.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, Sarah.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding. Today, we're not being asked to approve the count, we're just being asked to open it up to public comment, correct? So
Right.
we're not approving actual
Right.
scores
The-
right now, we're just
No,
opening
not
up
at
the
all.
The rule
next.
says you need to give preliminary approval to something so that we can post it.
But it's
So
not a final
It's not
vote on
final,
it.
Okay.
no.
No.
It's not final,
That's
it's
where
just
my
preliminary.
confusion was when the term
Yeah.
approval
I
with
think that
preliminary in
solves the
front of it
problem.
sounds like it's approval.
No.
That's why
But-
I didn't know
So
what you
there's
wanted
no
us to do.
implications of preliminary approval other than to post it for public comment?
Right.
Is that correct?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
So people will have opportunities to still provide. Okay,
Yes.
thank you. It wasn't clear in the,
I'm sorry. I-
no, it's okay. I may have
Sorry if that wasn't
misread
clear.
it.
And then
so-
you can let whoever called you
Absolutely.
know, and then that's how we'll get
Yes,
information.
and they can provide public comment either online, because we'll have these posted online with the public comment section, or they can certainly email public comments to us directly, and we'll be sure that those are included in what we bring back to you.
Super, thank you.
Follow up, Sarah?
Yes, if I may ask one more question. Is it possible to, just to get a general idea of what the makeup of those panels were, just so we have some basis of understanding of how
On the score
those were
setting?
set? Yes.
We can get you a list of participants if you'd like those as well. They included both teachers and teacher educators in terms of health and PE. Because those are P12 licenses, we tried to get participants from all grade spans, teachers, and the faculty who prepared those teachers. Virtual instruction is a little different. We tried to get people who might be teaching English online, might be teaching science online, to make sure we're covering the different content areas.
Thank you.
So I want to just clarify, everything that's going to be posted for review will be what?
Will be the three
The standards
test
themselves?
blueprints. They're test blueprints
Okay.
that cover the broad areas.
That we have a
where-
copy of, that
Yes.
includes the standards? Okay,
Well, the standards have already been approved.
correct.
But the test blueprint applies to the standards. It's aligned to the
Correct.
standards. So yes, you have that, and that will be posted. And then we will post the preliminary cut score, so that individuals have an opportunity to look at this cut score information and comment on whether they think the panel-based score or whatever you preliminarily approved today for comment is, post their opinion about that.
So exactly what we have a copy of is
Yes.
what will be posted?
Yes,
Okay, I just wanted to clarify.
right.
Did someone have their hand up over here, Brad?
I was just going to offer to my colleague, INACOL is the organization we were trying to think of, which is the International Association for K-12 Online Learning.
Couldn't think
In my
of it.
previous life, I was on
Do you
another.
have that memorized?
Well, I was on another board before this board that actually dealt with professional standards, so I've been involved in these conversations a little bit. So I know what Reese is referring to because I was kind of there. There are national quality standards published by INACOL, and at the time, the thought is that the state would move towards adopting a test in standards at some future point with a rule revision aligned to those. Now, I would want you to go back and make sure that that's what we're referring to, but I believe that's the genesis of it. And the idea was, as we saw an explosion of K-12 online learning, pedagogy in an online environment obviously looks a little different than pedagogical preparation in an on-site. So the thought was a test, some kind of set of standards, but that may help fill in the blanks because David has mentioned it's an international organization, but there are national quality standards published by INACOL. So I don't know if that helps, but try to fill in the blanks.
Can I ask one other question?
Yes, David?
I'm looking at the last page with all of the cut score data. It has various columns. It has the panel-based passing score, panel-based +2 or -1, and that's great information. I know I understand it, but do you intend to send this out without any explanation to the public on those +1, -1s, or how are you going to do that? Or are you just going to put out the panel-based passing score?
We can provide some layman's basic explanation of what those are. We're not gonna get too detailed because
Right,
that's gonna
I just,
confuse people
there's
too,
no
but-
explanation other than a calculation
Sure,
on this page, which I'd have to turn to my math experts on the board to figure it out. It pi square and so forth. I feel like
Yeah,
I'm back to the I-step again, but
we will
I just think
certainly put out
maybe
a good
a one or two
explanation.
line, what does
Yeah.
minus 1 plus 1 mean, be very helpful.
Sure.
Thank you. Thanks for doing that.
Dan?
Who needs this certification for online instruction, so to speak?
who needs it?
Well, it's, that could be misunderstood. Who needs it? There's more blended, really, approaches now, where it's not maybe pure online, but you use a lot of techniques, even in schools. And you can even be in a building and be learning a lot online, and then you have discussion groups. It's back from the 60s modular scheduling concept with technology applied. So, yeah, so who needs it, you know, so to speak? Who would have to be certified in this area, for what purposes?
Well, at this point in time, I think our recommendation would be that at least for some period of time, maybe a couple of years at least, that this licensure area be optional and not mandatory. The minute you create, this is a brand-new content area that we've never had before, and the minute you pass it
That's,
finally and make it mandatory, then you have immediately created a shortage of people who have the right license. So we would want to phase
Thank
this
you.
in over time, and maybe it will always remain optional
and Dave,
at your choice.
Thank you very much. And for that reason, I'm gonna go back to your splitting. Because when I send it out to input, I wanna know what we're trying to achieve and how we conceptualize it. Because if a lot of people give us time and input, and I'm probably behind, so just forgive me, but I would appeal to maybe we step back on this one a minute and maybe even have a discussion to know what we're certifying and why, and then take some of your input. Maybe we're right on, but this board member wants to understand this a little better, because I've been putting some time on this at my level lately, and I'm seeing a lot of change, how we even perceive it and what we use it for. And so I'd like to know what I'm getting input on and why. So if we could separate this out, it's not, the work isn't bad, by the way. I don't know that I, as a board member, know what we're trying to do here yet. And I want to get input, make sure we know, and if people put time and give us their input, that we're more clear. If we could delay that, I would be happy.
So I just want to reiterate something, because in her background information, she has stated that this is a new content area that's in the proposed REPA 3.
Right.
So Dan, do I hear you saying you want to wait until after we've approved REPA 3?
Not necessarily. But we wouldn't have this done yet. You could approve REPA 3 without this area, right?
We could, well, you could approve REPA 3 either with or without it. All this is talking about the test, not the content area that's in the licensing rule. And
But the
that content area could be, in the final version of REPA 3, be indicated that it's optional.
Right.
And what we would do is we would be looking for coursework in virtual instruction pedagogy in order to put that on someone's license, as opposed to letting them take a test and add it to their license. So if you include it in REPA 3, we could still use it as an optional content area if individuals want to add it, and if
I understand.
the institutions want to develop programs.
I wanted to back up and make sure what we've designed the test for and get people's input on. And it could be perfect. I need a little more time. That might be my need. If you'll say that's not our need, then I lose. So I can live with that too. But I would rather defer a little bit longer, understand the premise for which we're doing this, and then go forward if it's okay with my fellow board members.
And I was just going to link it to REPA 3, and we could just kind of take care of whatever we want to, and then we'll know where we're headed with it. So that's why I was linking it. So
Well, I see what you're saying.
do you see what I mean? Because we haven't approved REPA 3 yet, and it's supposed to be in there, and we have our assessment here. Perhaps we want to have that dialogue.
If I might, there were likely public comments made during hearings and online for REPA 3, which would have been back early in the year. And at the time you're looking at finalizing REPA 3, perhaps you could review the public comments that were made about the virtual instruction area to, refresh your memories about that.
So I don't know if you'd be open to a motion where we approve this without the technology certification. I'm sorry, give me the title.
Virtual instruction.
Yeah,
Thank
virtual.
you. I'm sorry. And then we I want to go back and catch up on it, but, I'll offer that motion, and if someone's second, we'll take a vote.
I think I have,
I'll withdraw.
well, I was just going to say, I can withdraw the motion, we can start
I'll
over.
withdraw my second.
Correct. And I can withdraw the motion. So now the motion's going to read, is there a motion to preliminarily approve the content tests for physical education and health and their respective panel-based passing scores?
I'll second that.
Any more discussion? All right, roll call, please.
Yes.
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 Tony, are you online? I don't think so.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Motion carries. The next item of business is Strategic Planning Committee Resolution. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution regarding the Strategic Planning Committee?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please. Oh, Andrea?
Well, I just wanted to express one caution before we voted on this. The Strategic Planning Committee's charge will be, among other things, to align the plan as needed with the strategic plans adopted by the Career Council and others. And that gives me pause. The Career Council strategic plan ventures into a brave new world in both tone and substance, and I just wanted to give you a few examples. Its vision is a good one of aligning the need for jobs with what's going on in our schools, but it calls for such a close relationship between schooling and future employment that I fear it will lead to a tracking system with some students on a college prep track and others on a career track that ultimately will reduce student choice and exposure to all the opportunities available to them, particularly in the liberal arts. It makes the acquiring of workforce credentials the primary aim of education instead of the acquiring of knowledge to be productive citizens. And I want to read Strategy 2.2, which calls for a career education component starting in kindergarten. And I think this is developmentally inappropriate in the primary grades and will cause schools to replace more worthwhile activities with work-oriented curriculum. I'm aware that it's already happening. A teacher friend of mine in Clinton has been asked by her principal to develop career curriculum at her elementary school. So I think we ought to be careful before we start infusing career education in the primary grades, and that's the caution I want to make about this resolution. I like to always remind us that schools are not talent development systems for employers, and students are not widgets. And it's my hope that we can treat at least K-3 as sacrosanct, so our children can read, write, play, paint, sing, dance, jump rope, and not worry about the career world that they'll have the rest of their lives to live in.
Are you wanting to make a change to the resolution?
I'm just wanting to object to the part of the resolution that would align the plan with the strategic plans adopted by these other entities. Without thoroughly looking at all those strategic plans, I'm reluctant to vote for the resolution.
Superintendent.
Dan?
I'm going to we have a lot on our agenda. I'll be very brief. My esteemed colleague here, there's an assumption that if you prepare people well to enter the work life, that is separate from being a good citizen, decent human being, civic-minded, and develop character. I'd like to challenge that thought a little with you, and we could have ongoing discussions about this, but I have, last year, over the academic year, I had approximately 1,000 conversations, some in small groups, some with faculty, employers, et cetera. And there was a resounding interest by employers to have liberally educated, we're not talking politics here now, liberally educated workers. People had a broad base, analytical skills, communication skills, et cetera. So they might be wonderful accountants, but the very things the world needs and an individual needs and a community needs, not surprisingly, employers need. So sometimes I hear a false dichotomy. You educating this person to be a worker bee for some big corporation or to be a good citizen? And I like to say yes.
And I agree.
You
And
know,
my principal objection is I think career education is inappropriate in kindergarten, first, second, third, maybe fourth and fifth grade. I don't want to prolong this. I think we should move ahead to a vote. I just wanted to get that on the record.
Can I just respond real
Sarah?
quickly? Just from being a first grade teacher and looking at this from that K through 3 perspective, I think it's important to recognize that there's no intent for talent development or anything along those lines in those grade ranges. I think when I look at that career element in the primary grades, I'm not looking at it as career development. I'm looking at it as career exposure. I'm looking at the fact that some of my students aren't aware of what their options are in our community or in our state or in our world, and my job is to expose them to the different types of people and different roles that we play. But I think it's important to recognize that we do expect our educators to be mindful at the same time of what is developmentally appropriate at that point, and to make sure that our curriculum aligns fully with what would be acceptable there. So just to push back a little bit, I think we have to assume that our K through 3 educators are going to be responsible about making those developmentally appropriate career connections.
But in the process of adding that developmentally appropriate career curriculum, we will supplant something else. It might be music, it might be art, it might be finger painting, but you can't add something without losing something.
If I may, just briefly too, I mean, I think, kind of echoing Dan's point that, you know, education is intended to, at the end of the day, you know, not only educate you on liberal arts and so on, but also prepare you for a future career. And I've never heard a parent in this state once say, I don't want my kid to have a job after they graduate. So, I mean, I think ultimately we have to keep our eye on the prize, not ignoring the points you're making, but at the same time, you know, raise our standards as much as we can, because we do continuously hear from companies that want to employ people that the workforce skills are falling short. So we really need to focus on that if we want to have a strong and healthy economy and a strong and healthy state. I might also add that my first grader has already decided on a career. She wants to cut hair for a living, so, you know, we're doing everything we can to prepare her for that.
Most kids that age have tried it already. I've had a few go through mine, they're rather artful. Maybe she had a good experience first time out.
Any more discussion? Roll call, please.
Yes.
Mr. Elsner?
Yes.
Dr. Freitas?
Yes.
Mr. Henry?
Yes.
Ms. Neal?
No.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Yes.
Dr. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Mrs. Woodruff?
Yes.
Superintendent Ritz?
Yes. Motion approved. Next item is the approval of rule language 13560, special education related services by choice schools. I don't know if we need any. Is there a motion to approve the final language? I think we've seen this before and have addressed it several times, so, and you've received a copy. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Albert?
Yes.
Mr. Elsner?
Yes.
Dr. Freitas?
Yes.
Mr. Henry?
Yes.
Ms. Neal?
Yes.
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 Yes. On the next item, approval of rule language 13561, requirements for education and special education related services of children who are placed in a facility under the written order of a physician. We have one person who wishes to speak. Heather Wiley.
Thank you, Superintendent Ritz and members of the board. I'm Heather Willie. I'm a partner at Burns and Thornburg. Sorry, it's okay. And I have the pleasure of representing Universal Health Services. And Universal Health Services actually went to the legislature with the underlying legislation, which you are now entertaining by rule. And I really just wanted to publicly thank the department, and specifically Becky Bowman and your legislative team and your fiscal team for helping us work on this for 2 years. The goal that you are implementing by rule is really to allow children who are placed in residential treatment facilities where they are in a secure locked facility because of their very significant health needs. A lot of our kids are on suicide watch, they're cutters, they've had significant challenges at home. This is a very small population of children that you're dealing with in this rule. And basically what it allows is for those facilities to have an on-site educational program where the student can get a full day of educational services in a high-quality educational setting, and that there are appropriate conversations taking place with the placing school where the child came from, and when the child's returning from the facility to the school district, that they're talking about the student's IEP, they're talking about the educational expectations, and they're really working on a plan that provides continuity for that student, ensuring that they get good quality services. So I want to also appreciate Michelle McCowan for working on the rule, but your staff superintendent was particularly terrific during the process.
Thank you very much. So we need a motion to approve the final language.
Move to approve language for 13561.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any more discussion or any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Albert?
Yes.
Mr. Elsner?
Yes.
Dr. Freitas?
Yes.
Mr. Henry? Ms. Neal?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Yes.
Dr. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Mrs. Wicker?
Yes.
Superintendent Ritz?
Yes. Next item of business is the dissolution of assessment subcommittee. Is there a motion to dissolve the assessment subcommittee? And prior to doing that, I want to thank the members, Sarah, Troy, Carrie, and Brad, for their work on the assessment subcommittee. Is there a motion?
Madam Superintendent, could I ask a quick question on something?
You
Because I
may.
actually asked for this as an action item, and
Sure.
timing on this matters. The assessment subcommittee was created through a resolution, and I want to bring it as a motion, but I'd like to frame the motion in a way that makes it clear that in dissolving the assessment subcommittee, it would not negate anything else that was a part of the assessment resolution that the board originally passed. I want to make sure that was clearly understood, but
Oh.
the intent of the action item was basically to say we're at a point now where I think the full board needs to be engaged on the decisions going forward on the final selection, but all the other things that were included in the assessment resolution, such as staff supporting us and doing other things like that was in that, it would be my intent in the motion that we're only dissolving the committee, we're not dissolving the resolution. I just want to make sure that if that's understood, I'll bring that as a motion.
I believe we've already completed the items
Okay.
in the resolution
Okay. Well,
as a subcommittee.
I'll move that we dissolve the assessment subcommittee, but that the resolution remains even though we're dissolving the committee.
So
Second.
What does that mean, though?
Anything that was in the original assessment resolution that outlines work that we had, and I don't have it right in front of me, I just want to make sure, because when I brought this forward, the intent was originally just to say, I think the full board needs to be engaged.
Oh.
And I think we're all on the same understanding, but I don't want there to be misunderstanding, and we've had some of that. So that's the intent. Just want to dissolve the subcommittee.
Any more discussion? Roll call, please.
We're gonna discuss it?
Oh, I asked for discussion, and I gave my first comment. Did somebody else want to
Yeah,
comment?
I do. I
Oh,
want
okay.
to
I'm
comment.
sorry, Troy.
I want to make sure that everybody realizes the work that was done by the subcommittee was very important. The information was very good, and it was very helpful in the development of the RFP that we had that was presented this morning. I just want to make sure that I don't care what we do as far as this action, but I will say the more people we have involved, the more difficult approval becomes. When two people have the option to make a decision, there's a 50-50 chance. When there's 5 people that are making that, it's now a 20% chance. When there's 11, it becomes even less. It's a 9% chance. And I think this is a very serious topic, as I agree with Dr. Oliver, for the next several decade anyway of possibilities here. So I think it's an important task, but I also think we need to reflect that the department has done an outstanding job in conjunction with everyone that's been on that committee and supportive and the hard work that has taken place, that I do not want to have a delay based upon discussion or issues that come up in that process. So that's my only fear, and I just want to make sure that that was heard today.
So the intent of the resolution was to get us through the RFP process. And so as I said before, I feel like the assessment subcommittee has completed its task according to what was in the resolution. And I thank you very much for that. Any more discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Albert?
Yes.
Mr. Elsner?
Yes.
Dr. Freitas?
Yes.
Mr. Hendry?
Yes.
Ms. Neal?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Yes.
Dr. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Mrs. Wicker?
Yes.
Superintendent Ritz?
Yes. Motion carries. Yeah, Carrie?
Can I, and I probably should have said it during discussion, but I enjoyed being on the assessment subcommittee. I mean, I get excited about tests, and I appreciate, not that we need to overtest, but I appreciate that we've started some subcommittees on things, because I do think, like you said, we may move things on a little faster. We may have more opportunity to work on some things that we're passionate about, and really utilize everybody's skills. And so I appreciate the opportunity to have been on it.
Thank you. Next item is to initiate rulemaking on revising accreditation rule to provide for pre-kindergarten accreditation. I believe you have the information regarding House Enrolled Act 1004. So do we have a motion to initiate rulemaking to amend 511 IAC 6.1-111 to add pre-K accreditation?
I'll move this one with pleasure.
Second.
All right, any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Albert?
Yes.
Mr. Elsner?
Yes.
Dr. Freitas?
Yes.
Mr. Hendry?
Yes.
Ms. Neal?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Yes.
Dr. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Mrs. Wicker?
Yes.
Superintendent Ritz?
Yes. Now, the next two items are regarding A to F accountability, and we're going to break them into two pieces. The first one, A to F bonuses for 2014-15 school year, and then the second, A to F configurations for 2013-14 school year. Working with the Department of Education and working with State Board of Ed staff, have prepared an actual emergency rule for your approval today. And one of the items that you're going to hear about, which is the configurations, you actually took action on a year ago. And so we thought the best way would just be to put it in emergency rule. And the first item we're going to talk about on the bonuses, we probably would have brought to you later. Didn't have a need for it to happen at this meeting. But since we had the concerns, we decided to go ahead and work with the emergency rule. So Michelle and Deb, if you could go ahead and begin.
So we provided to the board a memo last week that just provided you with the regulatory language that affects schools for 14-15 as well as 13-14. But largely that was emphasizing 14-15, including the bonuses and penalties. Those were largely around the main impetus of that was around waiver diplomas, and this would be the first year that it would go into effect for schools for those. So the school year we're starting now, 14-15, when grades would come out next fall, it would have these potential bonuses and penalties. So we collaborated, and we have provided you with today a hard copy around what we think would be reasonable emergency changes to the rule language about these specific provisions. In addition to that, we have provided you with language that would address what we call unusual configurations, although I switched it to atypical because I was worried unusual had a negative connotation. But this goes back to the issue that we, under the A to F regulation 11-51, we were probably overly prescriptive in trying to anticipate all school types. And as you know, schools vary in terms of the grade levels that they serve. So what has happened is, in practice, we have seen schools whose grades served and what I would loosely use the term for a data profile doesn't really align with what the regulation calls for. So we have provided this rule language to address both of those pieces.
And because I know you two were working on this even late last night at the request, we have one speaker. Could you basically talk, Todd Bess is going to come up here in a moment and speak to A to F bonuses for 2014-15 school year, but could you basically summarize what it is that you proposed in the emergency rule so that when he speaks, he knows what he might want to say?
Well, and I think that this is sort of, and we talked about separating it out, but we also have a speaker around the configuration. So
and I'm going to call both.
Okay. So basically, if I can point your attention to pages 15, 23, and 36 in the document you have in front of you, and we were careful to print it in color so that it would be obvious. What I did was put a comment section through the track changes so that you can easily identify what the staffs are jointly recommending on all of these provisions. I want to highlight that the weight afforded to college and career readiness score is going to increase to 0.30. So that is a change for 14-15, but the staffs are jointly recommending that language stay as it has been since this rule was enacted or filed in early 2012. On page 23, you will see the next provision that we wanted to highlight. And there you see language that has been stricken. Again, it's highlighted in pink, and that is the bonus and penalty language that we just discussed. So the staffs are jointly recommending that we do an emergency rule that would strike that language so that during the 14-15 school year, when those grades come out, schools won't anticipate being graded, having their overall school category designations be affected by this language. And the last piece you will see on the very final page, page 36, and this is what I'm just loosely referring to as catch-all language to address the unusual configurations and recommending a process that looks very similar to what we did last year, but putting it into the reg so that schools are on notice on what happens when you are one of these schools that doesn't have a full data profile under the school configurations or the logic models that are already created to run the data.
Okay. Anything to add to that particular point, Deb, before I call Todd Bess? Regarding the
I think
bonuses?
the DOE also did provide some additional information through some memos, specifically for the second component with the unusual grade configurations. An actual breakdown of 2013 grades as assessed under these unusual configurations, allowing for a combined model, if you will, utilizing elementary, middle school, and partial high school data. So the outcome of that was also available in that memo. Basically, you'll see in that 10 schools were assessed utilizing this type of modeling. Of those 10 schools, 5 schools were not affected. In other words, their elementary middle school letter grade was the same as their overall letter grade when combining elementary middle school and partial high school data. One school was not assessed. We could go a little deeper into that. I think it was end size or basically not having enough students to be able to calculate that grade. 2 schools saw a positive effect when implementing the high school data, meaning that their overall school grade was actually higher than only their elementary middle school grade. And 2 schools, and that was a 1 to 2 letter grade increase. 2 schools saw a negative effect by incorporating the high school data, meaning that 2 schools did see a 1 letter grade decrease by implementing the high school data over what their elementary middle school letter grade would have been. So that information again was contained in that memo as well. And just to refresh everyone's memory on policies and practices. So in 2012, elementary middle school grade alone was utilized for these schools for special configurations. In 2013, the practice was changed to utilize data where it's available, or in other words, utilize these combined modeling of elementary, middle school, and partial high school data, or 9-10 only high school data, to be able to assess the school under the philosophy of using all data points that are available.
So Todd Best, I'm going to call you up to speak.
Good afternoon, Superintendent Ritz and members of the board.
Good afternoon.
Todd Best, Executive Director with Principals Association. And just very briefly, we support what's been provided to you with the rationale that's provided at the bottom. Lots of transition right now, and had timing maybe been different, the accountability panel's recommendations would even have been implemented at this point for this school year. So especially in this transition time, we think it's best to stay with kind of what we know, what's been provided, and then move forward with that panel's recommendation in the rulemaking process as you guys have already begun. Certainly not to condone or support the general diploma concept there that's kind of been addressed there, but right now it's just best to stay the course if we can.
Thank you, Todd. Is there a motion to approve emergency rulemaking to amend 511 IAC 6.2-6-5.3 by deleting language that adds or deducts points for preliminary scores beginning with the 2014-15 school year? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any more discussion on that particular topic?
If we,
Troy?
my question is for the superintendent. With us not having that incentive in there, does that do anything with the waiver at all, as far as the language that was submitted?
No, the waiver did not get that detailed with that information. Good question. And it'll remain as it was that you've been operating under, the same percentages. Roll call, please.
Mr. Albert?
Yes.
Mr. Elsner?
Yes.
Mr. Freitas?
Yes.
Mr. Henry?
Yes.
Ms. Neal?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Yes.
Dr. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Mrs. Wicker?
Yes.
Superintendent Ritz?
Yes. So now the second part that's in the emergency rule is, and we have one speaker. So Heather Willie, if you would come and speak to the configurations for 2013-14 school year.
Great. Thank you, Superintendent and members of the board. Again, Heather Willie, wearing a slightly different hat now as a board member for Crystal House Academy, which is a charter school located here in Indianapolis on the south side. And I've had the pleasure of serving on the board now for a number of years. And we wanted to come before you today to talk about what we have referred to as the unusual configurations under the A through F rule. I'm joined today by Carrie Dank, who's behind me, and if it's appropriate, Superintendent, I'd like him to pass out a handout. I think it was emailed to the board members last night, but in case you weren't able to get a hard copy, we would like to provide it to you. Mr. Dank is the Chief Academic Officer and the Director of Crystal House Schools, and includes in that oversight Crystal House South, which is what we're specifically talking about today. I also want to thank Michelle McCowan and Bernice Corley, who was able to talk with me about this and share with you, I think, my email that I prepared for the both of them. asking for this to be placed for discussion on today's agenda. At the outset, I think it's really important that we express our strong support of rigorous accountability and being accountable to the public and our teachers and our schools and our students, most importantly, for strong academic performance. And we also believe it's important that the state, via the Department of Education, use every available data point to be able to calculate the true performance of a school. And we want to be held accountable to those same high standards. However, we are very concerned about unintended consequences of the rule as it's currently written. And I was hoping I could share a little bit about that today. One of the things that we want to be certain is that as we are informing the public about the performance of schools, that we're actually using accurate data and giving an accurate performance score. And we don't believe the way the current rule is drafted that we're able to do that for schools, particularly high schools, with an incomplete data set. So I'd like to provide a little bit of background information and then have Carrie walk you through what we've prepared as a very generic kind of demonstration of how this actually works in practicality. And we appreciate that the superintendent last year really didn't have a lot of flexibility under the current rule to change the way that we were scored. And so we believe it's important for the board to understand why we think it's a problem and why we hope that we're able to find some resolution as you consider emergency rule changes. We would like to see this addressed for this year's performance grades, so we are asking for consideration of emergency rule change, and we have some ideas about what that might look like. One of the things that the rule talks about is some unusual configurations, but it doesn't pick up or contemplate an incomplete high school. And what I mean by that is for a lot of charter schools, and not just charter schools, because there are some traditional public school programs that were in the list that also were impacted by this, this scoring rubric. We're talking about schools who may, for example, start with the grade 9, so we now have a high school, technically, but we don't yet have grade 10, 11, or 12. We may have 9 and 10, but we don't have 11 and 12. And what further complicates this issue is that graduation rate data is calculated a year in arrears. So even this year for Crystal House, we're very proud that we had our first graduating class. Unfortunately, you won't get to see that data in our performance score until next year. And so that further complicates the time frame for which these incomplete high schools are impacted by the way the current rule is set out. And so, the rule doesn't really contemplate what we refer to, I think, practically as a combined school. So schools under the rule, if you have a elementary, middle, and high school program, get a combined performance score. 1 grade, 1 school system. And we believe that's fair if you have all the data to plug in to the formula. In high schools, there are a number of different performance metrics under your rule. So there might be Algebra 10 or ECA data or improvement data for students from grade 10 to high school, graduation rate data. If you're a school like ours who, for example, only had pieces of that information, what's happening in the way the score is calculated, we're basically getting zeros in those other performance categories. We don't think that's fair. It's very hard to give you graduation data when we don't have a graduating class, for example. It's very hard to give you improvement data when we didn't have 10th graders becoming 11th graders or 11th graders becoming 12th graders. And so we wanted to bring this to you to kind of talk about the rule and to work through with the board some scenarios about how we think this could be addressed so that we're not just bringing you a problem, we hope to be bringing you a couple of ideas for a solution. So before getting to that, if it's okay with you, Superintendent, I thought it might be helpful for Carrie just to kind of walk through this little template exercise, just to kind of share what a generic school might look like and how their score would be impacted if they didn't have complete data sets.
Well, I guess I'm going to have the discretion of the board. 5 minutes is up regarding addressing the board on a public comment, so.
I'd like to allocate 5 more minutes for the second speaker.
Okay.
Just to be fair.
Is there any objection to that? Okay.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I will be brief.
So, as you can imagine, as schools grow, what happens is the complexity and the data points continue to increase, and that becomes more significant when you go from elementary grades to also including high school grades. And so what I've done in the handout is I've walked through and said, let's assume you have a school that has 50 students per grade, right? So 50 in every grade, evenly distributed, and that we use the same piece of data, or the same data rather, in the school when applying the incomplete versus the complete data. So if you work through it, assuming that the students score 81.7 in the English language arts under ISTEP and 85% passing math, right, which is right around the state average. And then in high school, 74% of the 10th grade students pass the ECA in English, and 68% pass in algebra, which also hovers right at the state average. When you're 12th grade students, of those 50 students, 44 graduate by passing the ECA exams. That gives you an 88% graduation rate, which also is right at the state average. And making an assumption that 15 of those 44 graduates earned college and career readiness points. So in that model, when you use the incomplete scoring methodology, that is a D school. However, using the exact same data, if you apply the complete high school formula, that school receives a B. And so as you can imagine, the difference in the perception of that school's performance going from a B to, rather from a D to a B is significant, and nothing has changed.
So obviously, we have some concerns. We'd like to see, like I said before, in the interest of time, we would like to see this addressed by emergency rule. What we would like to see is that a combined formula be used when there is a complete data set at the high school level. Until the data is complete, we would like to see the K-8 be given a separate grade from the high school, and the high school be assessed on any and all available performance data. But what happens practically is the metrics and the way that they're weighted in the formula, having incomplete data in the high school really skews the overall performance. We believe it is important, and I think I've heard this from the department staff at least, that we try to use every available data set. We don't think that we should get 3 years to have nothing reported at the high school level as our students are growing out grades. So we do think it's appropriate to have a grade for just that program, but we would ask that they be separated until that time, until there's a complete data set and an ability to actually assess a combined school model.
So if I could, thank you very much. So Deb, if you would come up and address what it is that we've been doing at the department and how the language that's proposed to us, how things are calculated, if you can in a brief manner.
Sorry, not quite as tall as they are. So in the example that was provided for you for this school, and let's just say that they are a K-10 school, to talk about this type of grades, to be able to talk about the weighting of how this would roll out as well. What we discussed last year, October of 2013, and was what was implemented for the 2012-13 school year and grades, we would actually use an elementary middle school and a 9-10 only model, and combine those scores to a final school or a final score, one score per school. So in other words, it is available, the data is available to drill into and be able to see that elementary middle school component and grade, as well as that high school component and grade. However, it is required currently by the rule, and I'd have to look into our overall statute of this as well, that we do need to provide one overall grade per school ID. So I'm not certain that we would be able to provide multiple grades. Again, we can definitely drill into the data at this time to be able to see that elementary middle school grade and that high school component. So for this type of school, what would have been done was calculated an elementary middle school grade based on the data set that's available for elementary middle school, calculate a 9-10 component and have the points allocated for those grades, in this case 9th and 10th grade, and then finally combine those two components into an overall grade for the school. Now that combining is based on the weighting of each of the elementary, middle school, and high school components based on enrollment data. So when you think about a corporation as basically one large combined school, if you will, from an A through F calculation perspective, you have grades K through 12. What you're looking at basically on that is we're calculating an elementary middle school component, and we're calculating a high school component, and we're combining the two to provide one overall grade for a corporation. Basically, because of the grade levels, let's say that all grade enrollment in all grades are the same, what we're looking at is approximately 60% of the overall grade comes from the elementary component and 40% comes from the high school component. Again, just based on the enrollment. So it's typically 60-40 in a corporation. So when we're looking at a school such as this, and again, for example, let's just say that it's K through 10, we're looking at really, what were my numbers here? We're looking at 6 grades in the elementary middle school side and 2 grades on the high school side. So we're looking at 75% of the overall grade coming from the elementary middle school component and 25% of the overall grade coming from the high school component, or in this case, 9-10 only data. Now I would say that using partial data has been addressed within the rule already. There are components in the rule that do address a school that has only grades 9 and 10 or 9, 10, and 11. There's also components in the rule that address what happens if a high school only has grades 11 and 12 and how that should be allocated and how those points should be assigned. What the rule did not address previously is what happens if they have those components on the high school side and also have elementary middle school grades as well. So last year, the department brought forth a recommendation to expand the combined modeling to allow for a combination of any of those elements that have already been defined through rule. So again, on the high school side, we have standard high school that uses all 4 data components: English, language arts, math, graduation, college career readiness. We also have models defined for 9-10 only that only uses English, language arts, and math. We also have models defined for 11 and 12 only that only uses graduation and college career readiness. Additionally, on the elementary middle school side, we have different models assigned there. We have standard elementary middle school model as well as a small elementary middle school model. So basically the recommendation last year was put together any combination of those components that have already been defined through rule to create the modeling, combined modeling. Again, currently the way the rule is written, it establishes that for the combined model, the high school component must have all 4 data elements, meaning it has to be the high school component only. So this recommendation is to really expand on that combined modeling and to allow for any of the models that have been allocated for high school to be used in the combined modeling.
So the recommendation is putting into place what it is that we've been doing.
Correct, what we did in the 2012-13 school year.
And if I'm understanding correctly, what's being proposed is to hold the school accountable only for its elementary, middle school data and not its high school data, despite that they're having assessments.
What we were asking for is, I think what Deb and we haven't had a chance to meet, so I apologize, but what she was talking about when you're talking about the combined score and just using the 9th and 10th grade data, you're still missing data sets. So there are multiple data sets if you're a complete high school that you get to use that's measured against your metrics on the elementary side, K-8. We're missing some of those metrics. So you're now taking a very small percentage of students and you're unfairly weighting that small percentage of students against all of these kids in K-8. And so, this year, if we go through this rubric again, 13% of our students will make up over 38% of our score. Last year, 7% of our students made up 52% of our performance because you don't have every little data set to plug in. So using the same model will result in the same effect. And if you look at those schools on your list, and I've talked to many of them on that list to try to get some input, not just from our school, but from other people who were impacted, all of them are D's and F's. all of them have similar problems. The ones that did better have more data. I mean, they're further along in their high school development. They had 11th grade data. They had growth, academic, performance growth data. So when you get to the D's on that list, in talking with those schools, it's because they had more data to plug in. So you're just basically expanding your weighting every time you add additional performance metrics. So the ones that were the D's did have additional data sets that we did not, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and Deb, go ahead. You can go ahead and address that. And Brad, I see your hand, so I'll get to
If you
it.
want to expand
But
that.
I want to make a comment that a school, there could be schools who never have a complete high school data set and would be held accountable only for their elementary, middle, their whole entire time, perhaps. And I guess what I'm saying is the board took action a year ago to use available data points so that there would be accountability for whatever data pieces you had in place at the high school level. But you can speak to the weighting, I mean, because it is weighting process, I know.
There is definitely a weighting process, but again, it's based on the actual enrollment. So the way that this works, again, behind the scenes, we're actually using pupil enrollment to determine the weighting between the elementary, middle school components and the high school components. So it's taking the actual enrollment for that school year in grades 3 through 8 versus grades 9 through 12. So that weighting will fluctuate by different schools, correct? Just based on one, their grade spans that they have, and two, their actual enrollments. Sometimes as these schools add grades, you'll see very few students actually in their high school grades, more students in their elementary grades as they're ramping up enrollment. For the purposes of our evaluation and the data that was provided, all of these 10 schools actually were elementary, middle school, and 9, 10 high school components, meaning that for the high school side, the only data that was used for all of those schools were their English language arts and math performance scores from the high school side.
Okay, Brad?
Brad's up.
If the superintendent would allow, I have a couple questions, but I'd like to really direct on the board council. There are more that crept up last night as I was looking at this scenario.
Yeah, no problem.
And Michelle, I know you don't mind being put on the spot, but here was the question that came up in my mind last night as I was looking at this. The proposed emergency rule language that talks through the combining, does it mitigate the anomaly that we're seeing in this scenario?
Sure. So, and I think that I would like to revisit the language. So if you look at page 36, it's very specific. So for each of the unusual configuration schools, these would be schools that have partial data for high school. And just to reiterate what Heather Willie had said, we do graduation rate a year in arrears as well as all of our CCR components. So it takes 5 years if you do what, for example, Crystal House South had done, where you add a year at a time. It would actually take 5 years after you initially add 9th grade to your school to get a complete data set. So I think that we should keep in mind what we're talking about. And then with the weighting system, even though you're getting additional PE, you might have kiddos. So when you add 11th grade, you have additional kids in you have additional student population. I guess I shouldn't call our teenagers kids. You have additional student population, but they're not actually contributing to the data that you have available because, again, the CCR and grad rate, those are done a year in arrears. So you might add to your PE without actually getting additional data as yet. So what we had jointly proposed, if you look at 511 IAC 6.2-5.7.1, which is going to be rejected by LSA. I'm going to have to renumber this, so please know that that'll end up being a different number. But and it's in pink, says that for each affected school, which would be all of the schools with atypical grade configurations or unusual grade configurations, the department would bring a list to the board of those schools, including the grade levels served by the school, the data that are available for the school. So again, do you just have ECA data? Do you have the ECA data, grad rate, and CCR data? Do you have and again, the 10 to 12 bonus piece, which is the kids who pass the ECAs their first attempt, if you're able to get them past those and get, for graduation purposes, that's another data point. that is available with additional grade spans, and then available models with historical sample data for reference. And I think that sub C is really important, because only when you see how the data roll out can you appreciate whether or not we might have these sort of unusual situations where you have a small number of students having a disproportionate impact over the overall school letter grade. And it's not unusual for schools to be able to, this is specific to historical data and not even the current year, but it would at least let you see what happens with data sets. But it's important to know that under the reg, we allow in our EMS model schools to see their data under a growth model only approach versus proficiency in growth, and they get to opt between those two grades for up to 3 years. So it wouldn't be unusual to use data and see how they look under different logic and make a decision based on that. And this would be historical data, not the current year data, so it wouldn't have a risk of bias, but at least the board would have meaningful information in front of you all to make a decision about appropriate models and avoiding any unintended consequences of which models are applied, whether it's a singular model or a separation. And the separation piece would probably require a separate accountability model, and that could end up being its own Pandora's box, but that would be another option.
Dan?
I'll go ahead.
Oh, Andrea?
Rather than have the board micromanage that process, is there any downside if you simply require that a model, the model that is to be used is the one that results in the most favorable score?
Sure. So I think that was sort of my recollection from last October. And it's been a long 10 months, but my recollection is we had that conversation last October around holding schools harmless. And my interpretation of that would have been to give the most favorable model, but there are different ways of looking at that. I'm sure that we could build language in to do that. It's sort of up to the board. We would have to come up with language, and we would want to make sure that we had language. If that's the will of the board, I'd like to kind of try to hammer out language now, so that we could take action on the language in front of us, because we don't want to slow down the grades. Since this would have effect for the 13-14 school year, it'd be good to get it done immediately, because with emergency rules, we can file them immediately, and then the department would have guidance.
Part of my question is what Andrea's getting at. Is there any legal downside to just taking what we did and writing it into the rule?
Putting it in here.
So I guess the question is whether, and I will look to the folks who have been most immediately affected, whether they feel as though we did utilize a hold harmless approach or use the most favorable logic model. And what I am hearing is that that wasn't their impression. And so if we just write language around precisely what we did last year, there might be different opinions. And the idea was, if you just lay out the data, here are the data under this logic model, here they are under this logic model, then it would be transparent.
So and I'm going to apologize, because I think I've misinterpreted a little bit about what we were doing here. So I thought that we were going to put into place what it is that we're doing. But the proposal is to actually bring it before this body each year, so that no one really knows what it is we're going to be using.
So that's actually what we did last year. If you recall,
I know,
the department brought it before the board and said, here is the list of atypical schools. We ran them through. First, we had a discussion sort of like this and talked about the problems and put spreadsheets up on an overhead and said, we're going to bring these back to you with our recommended model and get the board to approve that. And so that happened. And so I guess we were trying to write language to formalize what did happen last year, which was identify the problem and then provide a formal list of schools, and in a transparent way say, these were the schools that didn't neatly fall within the regulation, and here are the options with them, and this is what we recommend. Here are the data to support the recommendations, but here are the various alternatives.
So I guess we're all at the same point here now. So I have, this is really in place for this school year and the next school year, using the data, we're going to be using a new accountability system. So we'll have new rulemaking anyhow. Just speaking from me, I don't necessarily have a need to change what it is we're doing now for 1 year or to bring back information. So I want to ask a real legal question. So we made a determination how it would be figured in 2012-13. And then if we go and change how we want it done for 13-14, couldn't we be in some kind of legal liability for having, I mean, couldn't somebody say, hey, go back and redo 2012-13 with your new decision? I mean, I guess I'm unclear as to
So
why we would do this as opposed to just continue to do what we were going to do.
So just to clarify again, I think last year we thought it was a 1-year fix because at least my expectation was that we were going to have a new A to F completed during the year. But none of these schools fall squarely within the reg, and theoretically you could make an argument that none of them really have appropriate notice about how they're going to be graded.
And we're talking about 10 schools?
Yeah, we're not talking about a ton of schools. We're talking
Right.
about a
The
small
same
number
10.
of schools, but they're undeniably, we've already failed the appropriate notice requirements. So what I was trying to do is be as transparent as possible by providing the data under various models. My thought was we could show that we are holding them harmless, and then it's hard for someone to object when they know they fall outside the perfect parameters of the rule. And look, we looked at the different models. We gave you, as Ms. Neal said, the most favorable, if that's the, we used available data, and then we're kind of, in my impression, judgment, doing the best that we can to insulate ourselves against those criticisms, because we can show that we thought through it, we tried to be forgiving, and we're just trying to rectify the fact that really the ideal notice would have been for us to probably make this change last year and put it in the rule and formalize it, but we didn't. So we're again in the situation of having a handful of schools that don't fall perfectly within the regulation, and the question is how do we do something that's meaningful, provides the best information we can to kids, parents, and teachers and schools, and is also reasonably within the existing logic models. And we tried to be pretty specific with that drafted language that you have before you on page 36. We're not going to suddenly just hammer together something that doesn't exist under the rule. We're saying under the existing logic models, if perhaps it's, as Deb was describing, if it's a 9-10, if it's a small school, which is a school with less than 30 but doesn't include grade 12, then perhaps we use that. And then there's the question of separating, or perhaps it's which, as I said, that would mean separate accountability numbers. But those are the sorts of conversations that we need to have, and it's sort of hard to have them theoretically because without the data in front of you and running them through the logic model, it doesn't always show us what it's going to yield.
David, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, this is a question of fairness for schools, and it's a result of unintended consequences of the rule. The rule applies to every school, but there are 10 that have particular circumstances that are different. And rather than be hard-nosed that everyone has to do the particular rule, we've discovered and have already taken action last October to try to rectify unintended consequences. So I would certainly support the recommendation of our chief counsel that it does make sense to me. We've been through this, and when the list is presented, I don't see it taking more than 2 or 3 minutes. And then it's another opportunity to say, does this make sense for the future? But I thought it worked very well last October. And for whatever reason, it hasn't worked this year. Let's just get it rectified, bring it back. I think the recommendation is a wonderful recommendation to move forward with this. So I support that recommendation.
Thank you. I appreciate the discussion. One of the things is historical. When we started the accountability in A through F, we knew it would be a difficult journey. And it's a big state, a lot of different types of schools. And means it isn't 20, 30, 40, 50, 100,000 schools to make judgments on. I think we always contemplated the board would make final approval of the grades, and if you have people live, I mean, because it looks to me like we have a problem here. And if you bring that back with the best possible solution, and Superintendent, I heard you say something, I want to understand it. Are you worried about, there's some schools that would never then just have a 12th grade, they would have like just, and avoid accountability?
No.
I'm trying to understand that.
My comment was that we have some of the same schools in the same situation
Over and over
that
again?
we had in 2012-13 that are going to be here in the same situation in 2013-14. They could be in the same situation, you know, if we were going to
All
go
right.
on out. My point is, we calculated it one way in 2012-13, and then we bring the data forth again, and then we decide to calculate it a different way.
Well,
I would see a lot of questions there on behalf of the school, for sure.
Let me finish then. I appreciate it because I wanted to understand what you're saying, but frankly, we're on training wheels with A through F and accountability. And we made some judgments. We even had a panel form to say, was there special treatment? They said no. Matter of fact, it was actually plausible. Last year, we had our second year at it. You know, it's not like we have 10, 20 years of this. And it's not so many that the board couldn't analyze it and do right by people who, and we're talking about students and parents and teachers and principals working really hard to build something up, and let's give them the most fair chance to go forward. We're not saying you're not going to be accountable. We're just saying we're going to grow with you, and we're going to be using good judgment and help people grow really good schools. I think because it's so early in the process, I'm not concerned we would do it this way because it gives us a way to put good judgment by it and give people a chance to do the best.
Brad?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm clear, because I may be misreading body language, but because when we were there last year, I know we didn't change 11-12, but for 12-13, we said whichever formula favors the district or the school the best, that's what we were going to go with.
No.
You're saying no, and you're saying no,
No.
but I thought that's what we had settled on, was
No.
that you would run it each way, and you're saying no, that's not. So that's my question. So
No.
what am I, help me back that up to November or whenever that was, and help me understand what I'm missing, because if that's the case and we don't fix it now, then we're still basically creating an unfair situation.
So if we back up to 2013, summer and fall of 2013, and the 2012 grade review, and I'm going to try to quote this review process from Grew and Sheldrake. However, it's been a while, so I apologize if I don't quote this exactly. One of the things that they found in the 2012 review is it was a plausible determination and a plausible policy that was implemented consistently. And that is the key. The implementation was consistent. It wasn't implemented differently for various schools. Last year, October of 2013, I believe it was the will of the board to continue with that consistency, that whichever rule or whichever determination we made of how to apply grades, the department was to implement that consistently.
For all the schools.
For all the schools that fell within that type of category. So in this case, or this particular instance, any school that had an unusual grade configuration that had elementary, middle school components and the 9-10 components, we combined those two models to prepare the grade. All schools that fell within that were assessed under that same model.
So you achieve consistency.
Consistency.
But not
Right.
necessarily fairness.
Everybody, yes. All of them were done by the new calculations.
By the
So,
Grew and Sheldrake definition, that's fair when applied consistent.
so just to reiterate, so we could have schools that have a K-8, and then they have just a 9-10 school. What that really means is that we want to use all data, including their 9-10 scores, and not just their 3-8 scores. And the board determined last time that we were going to use all available data, and of course it's weighted, so that it's not going to, it's weighted by your attendance, the students that participated in the actual assessments, and calculated and got a complex piece. But that's what we decided to do. As a board, we decided that this is how we're going to calculate them. going forward. So, Michelle, from my point of view, I guess I didn't really view that necessarily as a one-year kind of thing. That's what we wanted to do for these unusual configurations. But I understand where you're coming from. That's what we did last year. We brought them to the board, and that's what we did. We certainly can bring them to the board again and go over this same discussion again. I'm just voicing my viewpoint that when you do it one way one year and you do it another way a different year for the same school, I would think there'd be a lot of questions about that. Andrea?
I think, unfortunately, the way we did it didn't turn out to have the consequences we wanted, because it's treated at least 1 and maybe 10 schools unfairly. It seems to me the proposed language solves the problem, but what I would hate to see happen is have scores published, grades published, based on one model or another before the board's had a chance to apply the most favorable model. So if we go with this language that you brought today, I would want there to be some assurance that the board gets to act before.
Oh, we would come for action at the very next meeting in September. The grades will not be out before our next meeting. So Deb, I want you to reiterate, and you can have review this here later because you have it now, and that's what Deb prepared for you on the actual consequences of the schools, and she started out that way by saying, here are the 10 schools, and here's what happened when you applied this model the last time. And I think we reported that back to you last time. We actually brought it back to you and said, here's what it is, because you had to place them in the categories. So we were very specific about that. Troy?
I guess, the other thing that you haven't placed in here is I understand that there probably is an appeal process here too, that you could resubmit sufficient ideas that may address that need right there, and it's already in place by rule. So, you take that individual school then and look at it. Is that correct?
Yes, there's definitely an appeals process to be able to appeal that type of information for DOE review.
So, there is something in place right now that would go to that scenario that we're shown today.
After publication.
Regardless, there is a process that you go through, correct?
Correct.
All right, so any more discussion? Yes, Carrie?
Going through my old notes, in October, Deb presented the same thing, and we had similar discussion. And then in November, she did come back, and in my notes I had down that there were 11 schools with unusual configurations, and 6 of them only had grades 9 and 10, and then you applied a manual override and had a chart for us to look at. And so if you could do the same thing, it is nice to look at a chart and see what happens under each of the different models, and to really give us an idea of what it looks like, because for these schools, it's a big reality of, a difference in a letter grade is, and there is an appeals process, but it's hard to overcome that after it's already been published.
Right. Any more discussion? Roll call, please.
What's the question?
Oh, I think we already had a motion and a second. Oh, no, wait a minute. I called you up to speak first.
Yeah, no
It's been a long time. Let me go backtrack. Sarah?
Superintendent.
Oh, Deb?
We did want to note also that if this is delayed till September to adopt language, that will impact the timeline for grades as well. We do need to know, the DOE does need to know what rules to apply to these schools before we do calculate the grades.
Michelle, that's not my understanding.
So my understanding was that we were voting on the proposed emergency language that would go into effect today. And then that would allow in September.
But she won't know how to.
Right.
I guess you can bring to us different you could bring to us a calculation.
Right. So no matter, the whole idea here is you proceed with grades. These schools already couldn't just be run through the system in the typical way. So for these schools, it would provide the names of the schools, the grades that are served, the various currently existing logic models, and how the data look under those different logic models, and then there would be action taken on where to place them.
So you'd bring logic models under the emergency rule, plural, back to us. We can make decisions on the 10, and it rolls.
Yeah, it would not, because the board already has to take formal action to adopt grades, so that could happen all in one action item.
Thanks for being
And when do you see that, the board taking any action on that, Deb?
Taking action on the grades category placements itself?
Yeah.
September.
Okay. That will likely, I do actually have an update later. Would you like me to just give it now?
No. No, but I know we're talking sometime in October, I know, which
Probably
is
mid-October.
typical. But that, I mean, when are you going to want to bring this information to us so we can make a decisions on that date when we release everybody else's?
It would likely need to be in October. We will receive the last piece of data to begin the calculations in late August. August 29th is the date we have on the calendar at this time. So for the September meeting, I don't think we would have that information at that time or be prepared to share that information. Thinking about the timeline of the meetings, the next available meeting would then be October.
Okay.
So under emergency rules, if the DOE did proceed to calculate these schools, as we did last year, again, utilizing data where available and bringing those options for placement, then we could certainly proceed with that.
Is that something you can get done on time?
Yep, that's the entire 6-week process.
Can I make a comment?
Yes,
before you
Troy?
do that? Is there a possibility in the future, if we're going to be doing it in mid-October on a consistent basis, why don't we just push it back to December and use current data? Current graduation data, so that the year the data is tested and the year they graduate is the same year, and that delay of 2 months seems very logical to me.
That's been asked a lot of times. It has something to do with legislative action, I believe.
Oh, I'm sorry, there's other timelines involved.
Yeah, there's a lot of timelines.
Sure. So, the statute that specifies how graduation rate is calculated, as you know, ends that on September 30th. And I will say I'm with Troy personally, and just as an attorney who's lived through some appeals, it would be great for schools to be able to get the most recent data. And if we're going to get grades out in October, I would agree, why not wait just a couple more weeks or 4 more weeks to get the most recent data, so that schools who have worked really hard and think they're going to finally see that increased graduation rate or those increased CCR indicators could see them reflected in their grades. It's really hard as a PR standpoint for a school to message, oh, well, that grade didn't really reflect what happened last year. That's what happened 2 years ago, but wait until next year and you'll see how really well we did this year. Parents, as we know, make decisions based on those school grades, and kids feel great when their schools do well, and it affects teachers, obviously, morale in the school. But if that is something that the board is wanting to do, then I would recommend that you include that in your emergency rule as well, because you would have a challenge of, you'd have to have 1 year where you piggybacked, because you wouldn't want to skip a year of data. So you would need to do 1 year where you have 2 years of data. Because right now, since we do graduate rate a year in arrears, if we suddenly just jump to 13-14, well, we never had accountability for the kids in 12-13. So what you would want to do is have 1 year where grad rate and CCR actually covered 2 cohorts of kids. And then from there forward, then you could have grad rate reflect the most recent years of data. Calculating it a year in arrears wasn't quite as difficult from PR when we were getting grades out in July and August, because it made sense, like, oh yeah, kids are still taking their ECAs. But when we're getting them out this late in the fall, again, I think that it's really a challenge for schools, parents, kids, teachers to wrap their heads around the fact that they're going to have to wait another year to see the most recent
Michelle,
data.
would that take some legislative action? Because I thought, are there some dates actually in law?
So the
like
only
the September 30?
The September 30th,
Right.
but the whole point is that
point.
just says grad rate has to be through September 30th. There's not anything that says you can't wait until you get past September 30th, which, again, last year we did grades in December, and so you're already after the September 30th, and therefore there's no reason that I mean, you're not in that position where you're statutorily prohibited from using the most recent years of data. Now then, if you're committing to that, then of course you're also committing to getting grades out later in the year. So it's sort of a choice between two not so palatable options, the way that legislation is drafted right now. You either get grades out late, but get to have the more recent grad data, or you get them out early and you have a year-old data.
And then
that
we
you're
also
looking
have the
at.
complication of grades aligned in some school districts as part of the teacher compensation. So, thank you. Dan?
If there's, Michelle, I'm going to ask you one more question while you're up there, so to speak. You could make the December part of the emergency rule.
Sure, I mean.
Because you're not necessarily December, but the two.
I think she's talking about the next accountability rule. Is that what you're talking about? You're not talking about right
You could actually make a
now.
part of this emergency rule. You could do 2 graduation rates, correct?
Oh, my.
I mean, I don't know what it would be in terms of a data nightmare, but
Oh,
I do
my
think
goodness.
that, I mean, legally, you certainly could say, we're going to include the most recent year of data as well in grad rate.
Just picking up on Troy's deal, you willing to?
But
Yeah.
you certainly could do that and as described in a future rule.
Yeah, I would like to go forward that maybe in a future one. Doing it now, school districts don't have any knowledge that we would be doing that.
I'm sorry, if I could add, there's a lot of other things that we would likely, or you may want to consider before doing.
I mean, we're talking 13, 14 here.
Absolutely. Superintendent Britt said the letter grades do affect educator effectiveness. Those letter grades are used in educator evaluations by many districts as well. So that while there may not be a legislative date for A through F itself, there are legislative dates defined for educator effectiveness ratings. So that would snowball and delay that type of information as well. Some other considerations could be turnaround schools, et cetera. So I think there's a lot of things that the board may want to consider. In addition, going forward, knowing that we're preparing to make changes in our assessments that will likely have an impact on the timeline for grades as we come out of all of these transitions. So in other words, if we move forward with testing grades 3 through 8 under one assessment, the timeline may look very different for when data actually comes back to the DOE than what it looks like right now. Does that make sense?
All right, thank you. Is there a motion to approve emergency rulemaking to amend 511 IAC 6.2-6 by adding language regarding schools with atypical grade configurations and data?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any more discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Albert?
Yes.
Mr. Elster?
Yes.
Dr. Freitas?
Yes.
Mr. Henry?
Yes.
Ms. Neal?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Yes.
Dr. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Mrs. Wicker?
Yes.
Superintendent Ritz?
Yes. And we have just one more item. Well, we have 2 more items, but let's do the MOU regarding funds received for CTE under Perkins Act and then just take a 10-minute recess. I believe you have before you the documentation regarding this action. Is there a motion to authorize the state board's executive director to execute a memorandum of understanding on behalf of the State Board of Education to allocate Perkins funds to the Indiana Department of Education?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Albert?
Yes.
Mr. Elster?
Yes.
Dr. Freitas?
Yes.
Mr. Henry?
Yes.
Ms. Neal?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Yes.
Dr. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Mrs. Wicker?
Yes.
Superintendent Ritz?
Yes. We're going to take just a few-minute recess. We will convene back here at 3:20, and we will begin with board operating procedures.